is commonly used. Yeah.
What is
Medulla oblongata.
what's the parenthesis
Medulla,
remainder?
that's a kind of date.
It's like yeah, there it is. I can't say that word.
Modulo?
Yeah, the remainder.
Yeah.
Modulo? Yeah.
Percent thing?
Yeah.
Percent thing.
I use that all the time.
You're a percent guy. Is the internet not?
What is this? That's new.
Oh, I'm waiting. Emily, you have to start the Zoom meeting.
Oh,
Do you have Zoom? Can we just make it?
I don't have the. I have the 30-minute Zoom.
Oh, can I just log in as me and take this stuff?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm on mute.
By the way, just for the record, Brendan just denied your entire representation of the database.
For the record, oh my god. How are you gonna put that
What do you-
on the record?
In what way?
No, it was, I don't remember the exact question Evan asked, but he was like, so is a model basically a spreadsheet? And he's like, no.
No, it is though.
But yeah,
So,
I get
yeah.
what he was saying.
Yeah.
But it was just funny the way you said that.
Yeah.
But it does make sense. It makes sense.
It's because you skipped a step. So a table is more like a spreadsheet, and it's an analogy. The model is a class that sits on top of that table that you can do all kinds of stuff with. All right, Tony, there.
Yep, I mean.
All right, and I have OBS running in the background, so it should be live streaming. Let's go check real quick. Yep, so live streaming. It's like a few seconds behind, but it'll also stay there. So after this class, it'll still be there for later.
That's pretty cool.
On your YouTube channel, Sam?
Oh yeah, buddy.
can you link that?
I'm a big Twitcher. Yeah, I think it actually is.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
okay.
it's okay.
Give us Fortnite.
Oh, yeah. You scroll up. He put the first one. I'm pretty sure.
All right, so we're gonna keep talking through Rails. We're gonna spend most of our time today still on the console. We're gonna go through a lot of the same things that we went through with JavaScript. Now that we have a data model to actually be playing around with, so we're gonna do a little bit with functions and loops and variables and all those types of things. So if you guys remember, and hopefully you've now all created your own Rails project, everybody has a Rails project, you're able to actually get into the console. I think I saw everybody was able to do that yesterday. And actually serve it too, like put it on the internet through localhost. What is the difference between localhost 3000 and fullmeasure.io?
You put full measure on servers that someone else is running 24/7.
Yeah,
Whereas localhost is just on my computer.
it's just on your computer. Yeah, that's the big difference. Yeah, technically, you can serve things from your computer. Your computer could be the server that serves out fullmeasure.io. But the difference with localhost is constrained to your computer. So you can, in some ways, frequently open up like Wi-Fi access to your localhost 3000 so other people can go look at your computer. We're not going to do that. It's good. But the big difference is localhost is just on your computer. Nobody else can get access to it. You're just doing it locally. All right, we built a couple of models last time. So we have our board model, and we have our item model. So if I go into the console, first of all, how do I get into the console?
Are you gonna?
Oh, my neck. There's so many video things. All right. So, how do I get into the Rails console?
Oh yeah. Bundle exec Rails.
Well, there's a problem.
You have to CD into your Rails.
Yeah, it's just a trick, but it's a good, like, why doesn't this work type thing. All right, so we were in terms of... Bundle exec Rails C or Rails console. C is just a shortcut. All right. So if I want to create a new board, how do I do that?
Board dot create exclamation mark spin and then the name parentheses name.
All right. So now we've created a new one. So now we can do things like board.count and just select count star from boards and move back to. We have 2 boards that exist, which is going to be useful later when we got to do some iterations. Okay. So now let's start talking a little bit about methods. So if I wanted to call a method here, let's what do I have available to me on board? I don't remember what I actually put there.
Name.
You just put name.
It's just name. All right, so let's actually look at an item, just because it has a few more fields and we can do something interesting. So let's say print priority. Okay, and I'm going to just say puts name as priority. I haven't explained anything about what this does. What do you think that function is going to do?
So name and then has priority and then edit.
Yep, so it's going to do, what's this called?
Interpolation.
Interpolation. So what do you think, it's actually not an item, it's just, what do you think name is a reference to there?
The property that we put is a name and priority.
Yeah, so the name is a reference to that, an instance of this item, okay? So you can write something like this, and this is where classes become valuable, and they're more valuable in some ways than just tables, raw tables are. So if I have an item, so let's see if there are any. Okay, so I have an item, right? Remember I have to type this reload bang thing to get the code to reload in the console. But if I do item.first.print priority, what do you think is going to happen?
Learn Rails has priority 1,000.
Yeah, you guys see where that comes from? So our first item.
Actually, well, it's task name, but it's over.
Oh, yeah, good catch. Our first item has a task name of learn Rails. It has a priority of 1,000. So if I say item.first, that's going to give me back this task, which is an object, as we would have done it in Rails. It's this object in particular, so it has several attributes. One is ID, one is task name, one is priority, etc. So if I say item.first.print priority, what it's going to do is call print priority for that item. So it's a function that's on that particular object's item. It's an instance method. And so what it's going to do is put out, in our case, we need it to say task name priority. Okay, so I fixed it. That was cool. I didn't even have to do reload, and it just worked. But maybe they upgraded this Spring stuff. Yeah, it seems like it. So all we're doing, right, is we're getting back the first item that we have, and then because we have this method that's defined as an instance method, we're able to access it and use the properties of the instance that we have in that method. It's a cool little thing. So there's some usefulness in this, and like, you might want to have a person, and the person has a first name and a last name. And you don't want to also store name in the database because that's silly. Name is just the first name plus a space plus the last name. So you might, in your model, have a name method that puts first name and last name together. Okay. So that's one of the ways that we use this type of thing. All right, so does that make sense largely to everybody? All right, so that's a method in Rails. They're pretty easy to create. Now, you don't have to interact with models at all. You don't have to write the code in a model. You can write code in other places. In other words, you don't have to put things on top of database. You can write your business logic as a Ruby script that doesn't have anything to do with the model. So just like JavaScript. So a simple example of that, we can create, let's just go ahead and create a new directory. I'm going to call this services, which is just a convention that's used for putting business logic somewhere. Create a new file. We'll name it example service.rb, and then we're just gonna say example service. Okay. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can go about writing this code. Generally speaking, what I like to do is use this adder model. I'll show you in just a second. I always forget the syntax for this, so I have to go look somewhere doing it. Come on. Let's see. All right, so we can use this active adder model from Rails. It's just this nice way for us to be able to pass attributes easily into our class. So in our case, we can now pass into a new function, query, full measure session, etc. For the moment, we're not even going to worry about that all that much. We're going to do, we're just going to create a function that's called like run, and all we're going to do is put we are here. Now, the other thing you need to do if you set up a service is you have to go into the config. It's just a one-type thing. But inside of application.rb, I also forget the syntax for. There's one line that you have to add to your application.rb so that it auto-loads the services. Remember, Rails is convention-based. It expects that you're going to put all of your code into the folders that it creates for you when you auto-generate the app. If you need to put something else in there, then you have to let it know about it. And in this case, we've created a services directory, so we want to auto-load all the classes that are in the services directory. And in order to do that, we just have to add a line of code to somewhere how this one didn't do it. Auto-load pass, load session saves, What? How did you guys do this? It's this. So we just take that and we put it into what is going on? That, and now it'll actually auto-load our services. I'm pretty sure I have to exit the console to get that to load up, so I'll go back in. But now I have access to the example service that I created, so I can do something like example service.new. What did I call the method? Run. Okay. You also have to add a gem for active adder. Sorry, sometimes when you have things set up all the time, you just forget about the little pieces. So this gem file. What is going on? well, not exactly sure. That should be fine. All right. Well, we'll just go back to using the model then for the moment. The point is you don't need a model. You can write code inside of any class. You should be able to use it and set it up. I'll get a better example for next class so you guys can see that. We'll go back to the item. It's the same concept. There's two types of methods that you can create in a class. One is the instance method, which is what we've been using so far. The instance method references the object itself, right? So there is an actual item. Item.first is an item that has an object that has values. The second is a static method. Does anybody know what a static method is?
It represents it's a method that you just put in the class, but you're not using an instance.
Right. So we can create another one that's called def self dot print me. Okay. This is a static method, or sometimes it's referred to as a class method. And the difference is simply that it doesn't have access to the instance itself. So you can call it as many times as you want to, but it can't access print priority. It doesn't know what task name is. It doesn't know what priority is. It's a static method. Okay. So we'll do something like let's print me. And it's called a little bit differently. So instead of finding an item, we just take the class and we say item dot print me. Okay, so that prints me. I can't do something like task name. Okay, if I do that, I get undefined variable task name. And the reason is that we're using a static method. Static methods are things like you'll use them all the time. So like where, find, first, right? All of those things are static methods because you're not interacting with an instance of, or in our case with models, you're not interacting with a row of the table. You're just interacting with the class more generally. Yeah.
Does it have access to things like item.count that you did before?
Yeah. So like count is a static method. And those static methods are all being defined by application record. So if you went and looked at application record, and it gets a little convoluted because it ends up inheriting and including all kinds of other things, but there would be a static method on application record that's count. And what it does is it says, look at the name of my class, which is item. Let's lowercase that and pluralize it, okay? And then I want to go to the table that's called items, because that's the lowercase pluralized version of item, and I want to run select count star from that table name. Okay, so application record. So this is an interesting thing too with classes. There's this concept of inheritance. Inheritance means that you get all the functions that were written in the other class in your class. Okay, so like an application record, any methods that are defined here, which in this case it's then inheriting from active record base. And if you go inside of active record base, you see it extends all of these other things. So you get lots and lots of methods on your item model because it's inheriting from code that's been written elsewhere.
So would it have been possible to go through and just in that method print the names of every item that you have?
Yeah. So, but we would have to do something like self dot class dot all dot each do okay. So what we're doing is we're saying self is like me, who I am. Let me get my class, which is the item, and then I'm going to call all on it, and then I'm going to get the item, etc. Now the easier way to do this is to do something like item.all, which is just the way that you would do that in the Rails console as it already exists. As you get that, that's one of the things from application record that is there. Right now there's only one. You can do board.all, and it'll give you back all of them. And then you can iterate over them. Using self.class is just so that if you do end up changing the name of the class for some reason, it still will have the right reference. So if you change it to be to-do list item, then you would have to change down here to be a to-do list item, or you can just use self.class, and it's just a reference to whatever the name of the class is. The more interesting piece here is, so you can, if we do item.all.each like that, we should be able to now call print me. So if I say item.printme, reload. Now I print learn Rails. That's right there. That's the line. It then returns what the full return is, which is all, which is why you see the other piece. If I do something like, so that now it's going to return true or false. We just see the learn Rails.
The return on, like in each block, is the
Full set.
Okay.
At least on an all.each for models. So what it's doing is it's printing and then it's returning. All right, so that's loops. That's how you do that type of thing. How would I get, like if I go create a couple more items, I'm gonna create all right, so created another task. So if I do task.all, or item.all rather, I get back 2, right? Or item.count, there should be 2 of them now. So if I wanted to get the task with a priority of 0, how do I do that?
Within all your items.
Mm-hmm.
Item.where, or actually, you do where, then priority, colon, 0, parentheses, and you can do.
Yeah, so you can see that does select items.star from items where items.priority equals question mark, which we then follow over here, priority 0, limit question mark, limit, it's eliminating it to 11 results. So we get back just that item. Now, is what we got back an array?
Yes.
Yeah, so how do we get, so if I don't want the array, if I just want that particular item, how do I get that?
You can do a dot first at the end.
Yeah, so you can do dot first. You can also, the same syntax that we use for array index in JavaScript, you can do array 0, square brackets. All right, so that's how we can sort of filter things down. There's another shortcut. There's all kinds of shortcuts like these that you'll find as you go through the active record stuff. One of them, instead of having to do, instead of doing where, you use what's called find by. You can do the same thing that you're doing in a where, except it only gives you back the first result. So it's basically like doing a where.first. So you can do item.find by priority. It's unstable. You're unstable. So I just did item.find by priority 0, and now you see what we're getting back is instead of an active record relation with an array, what we're getting back is just the item itself. And then another way to look at this is using that pretty print syntax, so you can see that a little bit more clearly. You can also do things to result sets from these queries, like to JSON, and it'll give you back the JSON formatted version, which is a little bit more consistent with what we see in JavaScript. So if I do, you see how we have the curly brace, and then it's doing a bunch of escaping, is what the slashes are doing. But in the end, we're getting back this object, as opposed to if I do item.all.toJSON, now you see we're getting back the array syntax rather than the curly brace. It's a little bit easier to translate between the two that way. Okay. All right. So that's how we do some basic querying with items. That's how we can add functions, both instance methods and static methods. If we go look at this guy here, do we generally understand the difference between the two? Like questions about that? No, it's a little bit of a weird thing. Why would we want to use a static method ever?
It's usually to represent something that's like just like a general tool. Like in math, you might have something to calculate like pi.
Mhm.
That's just a general thing that you're just gonna need.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you're just gonna have something to generally give you all the lists of names that you have.
Yep.
Things like that. Not something specific to one person.
Yep.
or an instance.
Yeah, it's usually something that's rather generalized. In our case, what they're using them for in the application records is to generalize up to the table level. So as opposed to instance methods, which represent the row level, the static methods represent the entire table level. So if you want to do a query against the table, they've written those as static methods. If you want to do something with a particular row in the table, they've written those as instance methods. The reality is you never actually have to use a static method for anything. You could always create another class and instantiate it and then get the result set from there. But those are sort of the general guidelines for when to use one or the other. You'll see we use very few static methods in our code. There's just not a whole lot of use cases for them. We do use them for some things like we've written our own sort of version of active record, it's called, which is all this application record stuff that you're seeing for TypeScript on the JavaScript side. And so we use static methods there, but that's really about it. Most of the time you're interacting with instance methods like this guy. All right. So now we can write our functions. We can do whatever we want inside of these functions. Let's say that we want to create a variable. Hello. Let's create a boolean. So let's create a boolean that's I win. Set it equal to true. And then I'm going to do something like if I win, puts I won, else I lost. All right. So if we call this print priority function right now, what do you think is going to happen?
I won
I won. Why is that?
because it's I win is true.
Mhm.
Just checking if it's I win is true. So then do what's in there.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But why is that just a Ruby specific thing that you don't have to put puts again in the else thing, and you just wrote?
No,
that line?
I just
Yeah.
missed it.
Oh,
Good catch. Yeah. All right. So yeah, right now it should say I win or I won. How do I actually call that method?
You get an instance.
Okay. So how could I get an instance of my item?
Item dot first.
So you can say item at first, and that works because we happen to have some items. More consistent, like if we were using the service infrastructure that I was talking about, so we don't have the active record stuff that we have right now, usually what you would do in Ruby is do new. Okay, so item.new is saying give me a new instance of item. And then we can call the method, so we can say print priority. And we get back the old stuff because
You didn't reload.
I didn't reload.
Yeah, that's weird. Sometimes it does.
Yeah, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know. So I won, right? All right. So then, if I change this to be false, what's going to happen?
I lost.
Yeah, pretty simple. But I lost. Okay. All right. So that's how you define methods. That's what if-else statements look like. The other thing that's a little different for JavaScript if-else is if you want to do an else-if statement. you don't write. So in JavaScript, you would write it as else if like that, and Rails, you write it like this. So we can do something like that. All right. There's another difference here with if and else ifs compared to JavaScript. What is it?
I guess the double equal signs.
The double equal sign instead of the triple equal sign. You guys remember in JavaScript why we use triple equal signs?
For data types.
For data type analysis. So two equal sign says that these two things are generally equal, which is generally in most languages, that's what you would use. The third equal sign says, and their data type is equal. So this is a string of 1 equal to a string of 1. Okay. When we do it in Rails and in most other languages, you just have to use 2, and it also does that type of checking. So in this case, if I were to run this, what's going to happen?
So close.
So close. Okay. All right. So methods in, by the way, in Rails, you generally refer to these things as methods. In JavaScript, you refer to them as functions. It's just convention. They're the same thing. So I'm going to go back and forth when I'm using methods and functions. Same thing. But you have parameters for methods in Rails just like you do in JavaScript. So we could pass in I win instead of setting it inside the function. Right. So I could do that, and then if I run this, what's going to happen?
It'll give you an error because it expects an argument.
Yep. So if I put in 5, what's going to happen?
Else.
I lost.
I lost. See that? See why that's happening? So the argument is I win. I'm passing in 5. I win is 5 here. 5 does not equal 3. 5 does not equal 2. So I drop in I lost. All right. There's 2 types of parameters that you can use in Rails. One is place-based. So it's very much like what we saw in JavaScript. Do I win, I lost, right? And so the position, it's position-based. The position in which I put the argument determines which one it's going to be associated with. So if I just put I lost, if I do this, what's going to happen?
Will be an
It will,
error.
yeah, it will be in there. Isn't that you?
Yep, so given 1, expected 2. So if I just say, nope, what's going to happen?
You like nope, and then I lost.
Yep, so I lost is nope because it's in the second position. So it's going to put out nope, and then it's going to evaluate I win, which is 5, so it's going to go to I lost. So everybody see that? All right. So we see nope, and then we see I lost. All right. The second type of parameter is a named parameter. By the way, I've been in JavaScript and TypeScript a lot, so that's why I'm doing that. In Rails, the convention is to do this instead. It also becomes useful for a couple of reasons. One, this is also how databases are generally treating fields, so a lot of times when you're pulling the data out, it's going to be in that same format. It also helps for when you're sending data down to the JavaScript side of things. If you're using underscore-based attributes, it's usually because it came from the server as opposed to something that you created on the JavaScript side. So it's kind of nice to have the differentiation. Yeah, and you'll see that that'll make more sense when you actually start pulling data. But all right, so I win and I lost are name-based attributes or parameters. So I win and I lost. The nice thing about this is that you can put them in any order that you want, but you do have to explicitly name them. So you have to pass it like this as opposed to just putting the values in. Okay, so I switched the order, right? But I have to name them explicitly. So if I do this, what's going to happen?
What is it? It's supposed to be I win, not I won. You put the
Oh,
wrong
it's
one,
it's
yeah.
it's I win. Yeah. So what's gonna happen with that?
Well, then,
5, and then I lost. So it's gonna say 5 because I said I lost is 5, and then it's gonna say I win is nope. Right? Does nope equal 3? Nope. Does nope equal 2? Nope. So I lost.
It won't give you an error because you're doing like a word and then a number.
Yeah.
It won't mess it
No,
up.
Rails is really. Really. Rails is pretty type insensitive, so it does a lot of sort of newer frameworks are type insensitive like that. So JavaScript is super type insensitive. Ruby is, PHP is, Perl is. So like if you were using a language like Java, then it would give you a type error, but it's usually type errors come during compilation. So it would happen even before you went to go run the program. It would be yelling at you about stuff. So when you get to Java's super strict. So TypeScript actually has a lot of that stuff, and we will use TypeScript here because that's what the stencil stuff uses. The value of typing is, it does help with that type of a thing a little bit, but a lot of times remember the data that you're getting is coming from some external source, right? So you're fetching things from an API, and the data changes frequently. So actually having it loosely typed allows you in many cases to like have your things keep operating more or less as normal. They just might be a little bit strange, as opposed to just like every time they change their data model, you throw up a massive error. It's more like I'm just going to go into the else condition and handle it that way, and then you have to go fix it. But
what if you did like I win, like in the if else statement, like I win greater than 2 or something? Even then it won't.
That's a good question. Yeah. So that might actually fall in there. Nope. So that actually does tell you about the string. But that's because everything in Ruby is an object. And so even when you're doing these comparison things, it's really like calling, what it ends up doing is saying I win dot greater than, which is supposed to be a function that's on I win. But because I win is a string, there is no greater than function. So what it's really yelling at you about is not that I can't do the comparison because these one is a number and one is a string. What it's doing is saying I don't have a greater than function for for a string. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because why would you create one of those? Right? It doesn't make sense. All right. All right.
The add function in Ruby is really weird if you write it like that. You just write like you could write like 5 dot plus sign 1 and it adds them together.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yes, strange things. All right, so that's a little bit about classes. Why do we use classes?
organize information.
Yep. So very much like we use functions to organize code, classes are just the next level up. How many classes do you normally have in a file?
In one file?
Yeah, 1. You could have more technically, but it's going to get weird. It's just useful. It's like this is an organization of a set of code that I want to be able to run, so it's 1 file per class. Can you create variables outside of your methods?
Yes.
You can. It's just not the best practice to do that because then they're more globally available. It's better to put them inside of the methods. There are ways. So in Rails, you have instance variables that are set. So whenever you're interacting with an instance, they stay the same. The way you do that is with an @ symbol. So normally when you have instance variables, you're going to do something like I lost equals. Come on. And then you might do something like run, which is going to run all of your code. And so you might say, I want to go ahead and call priority, and then I want to put @I lost. All right, something like that. Because I'm just going to change it back to place-based, position-based parameters. So if I do something like that and I call run, what's going to happen?
It's so close. Oh wait, it's gonna be hello, so close, and then oh wait, yeah, I'm just gonna put the I lost.
Yeah, so let's
So it's gonna be hello again. Sorry.
yeah, so it's gonna be hello again. So let's just walk through that slowly, right? So we're gonna call run. Run's gonna call print priority with I win set to 2 and hello and I lost set to hello. So when we come here, so I lost, our instance variable, is gonna get set to I lost, which is what?
Hello.
Which is hello. And then I'm gonna say if I win equals 3, does I win equal 3?
No.
No. Does I win equal 2?
Yes.
Yeah, because I win was 2, so we say so close. So that's the first thing we've done. Printed out so close, right? Then we're going to skip past all of that, so we're done executing this function. So we're going to go to the next line, and we're going to print out at I lost, which is what?
Hello.
Hello, because we just said it, okay? Now, if I take away this instance variable, and I try to just print I lost, what's going to happen?
You'll go there
An error Y.
because it doesn't know what I lost is.
'Cause
there.
It doesn't know what I lost is right there because this not being an instance variable, not having the at sign in front of it, is a scoped variable. So it's only relevant within the function that it's written in. So it's only relevant within this run method. Okay. But if I do this, it's going to reference the instance variable. What's nice about that is you don't have to worry about variable leak. Okay, so you can name this I win and this I lost, and you don't have to worry about potentially reusing those same variables in other functions because they're scoped to just that function.
In your IRB or console, whatever it is,
Mhm.
can you can you look up I lost?
No, it only is useful on an instance of that method. So what you could do is I could create a. So let's even getting it's a little bit difficult syntax. So here we can create a getter function. So like get.
Oh, because you have to. Yeah.
And we could create a setter function.
Mhm.
It's just to simplify. Let's just get rid of all these other things. And again, it's only scoped within the instance, right? So let's. I'm gonna create a variable called item. I'm gonna set it equal to item.new. Reload. All right. So item.new. If I call get I lost, what's gonna happen?
You get nil.
You get nil because I lost hasn't been set to anything yet. So then if I say item.set I lost and I pass in hello, what's going to happen?
You'll just do what you want to see.
Yeah, it's just because it happens to return it because it's on that line. So Rails returns whatever the last thing in the method is, so it's returning that. But that's why you see that. But now if I say item.get I lost, what's going to happen? Is it going to be nil again?
No.
It's going to be hello because now our instance method is running. But if I say item.new.get I lost, what's going to happen?
You get nil again because that's different.
Because it's a new instance. That's why you use the new keyword, because you're getting a new instance of that model. Okay. So when I say item.new.get I lost, now it's new. That's why you have to set it to a variable. Because if you don't set it to a variable, then every time you call get I lost, you're getting a new instance and getting the I lost, and you never actually see it change. Does that make sense? Okay. So we actually covered quite a bit more than I expected to. Hopefully nobody's too lost, but we did go over. So we went over variables again, we went over methods, we went over instance and static methods. We talked briefly about inheritance, which is this extending from other classes. We'll get into that more as we move through the course. We talked about instance variables and how they can be used effectively. and we did one simple little each loop of things. Okay. So each is the most commonly used iterator in Rails. So we can do that again. Right, so we could just do something simple like item.all, which is going to get all of the items that exist in our database. And you can use each. In the case of models, when you're pulling things out of the database, you actually generally want to use find_each. The reason is it does it automatically batches, so it'll get 1,000 out of the database at a time. So if you remember, like we can talk about really big databases where they could have like 1 billion things in a table. If you tried to load all billion things into memory at one time, you're probably going to crash your computer, even if it's a pretty big memory-based computer. Okay? So instead of getting all of them into memory at once, you get 1,000 at a time, you process those, you go get the next 1,000, etc. So one of the useful functions is find_each, which just batches them in batches of 1,000. You don't notice it in terms of writing the code. You write the code in the exact same way. It just makes it a little bit more performant. Just a thing to be aware of. But we can just as easily, and in normal arrays, so non-modeled based arrays, you want to use .each, and it'll do the same thing. So then we can do something like this. So this is, again, is very similar to what we were doing in JavaScript. Our function with a parameter is just, the syntax is different, so we say do and then the parameter this way. But now we can do something to that item on every iteration, so we can say something like item.taskName. Let's just print it out.
You can do that in an instance method, call its own class static method.
Yeah, because inside of here, it doesn't really know. Like the better way to do this is, again, self.class.all.
Because I'm like, I guess I'm Java, you can't do that.
Yeah, so Rails, so JavaScript or Java, you can do what's called metaprogramming in Java.
Oh,
But yeah, so metaprogram, but Rails is really good at it. Metaprogramming is where you have the computer write code on your behalf. So basically, you can do things like, I want to look at all of the classes that are children of mine. I want to find all of the rows from all of those classes, and then I want to do something in aggregation with them. You can write a lot of that type of code in Rails because you can access things like the class and the class name and that type of thing. I'll show you guys a little bit of metaprogramming. That's how we built our controllers, so that you can extend from a class. It's much like, it's actually very close to how Active Record works, right? So Active Record has a lot of metaprogramming happening in that the code is written in such a way that depending on the name of the class, it's going to do something different. Right? So it's going to do select star from items because this particular class happens to be named item with a capital I, right? And so it says, okay, when I get run, look at my class name and then lowercase it and pluralize it, and then that's the table name. That's what I'm going to use in my table name. Okay. So there's lots of things that you can do with metaprogramming that are kind of cool like that are easier than explicitly writing things. So this is where you hear people say, like Google says something like 40% of their code is being written by a computer, like they're not explicitly writing it. That's all it is. It's metaprogramming. It was still code that was written by a human that's doing something. It's really not that special. It scares the crap out of people, but it's really not. There's nothing that exciting about it. It's a very interesting and useful technique at times. It's I say that with caution, though. When you get into extreme metaprogramming, what you can end up doing is you lose a lot of the tools. So like in Rails, I can command click to go to this. Right? A lot of times with metaprogramming, you're dealing with broken strings and things that you can't command click to go to. Metaprogramming also becomes, because it's not explicit code, you have to really understand what it's doing and iterating and creating classes and creating other code. It can be kind of a mind meld, right? So if you can write explicit code in a small amount of code, you generally want to just write the code. There are certain circumstances, especially where, so like we had a data warehouse that we called Beast that we wrote, and its function was to take all of the data from both. So for each school at that time, we had a different, what we call ICE, which is our main database. So we had one for each of the schools that we had, and then for each school we had an integration over their system. So the data that we were pulling was different at each one of those schools. So we wrote an engine that would ask for what the names of the columns were for each of the tables at each of those institutions and on our ice, and ask for the names of those tables and ask for all of the attributes that would be inside of there. And then we built the database based on the information that we got back, whatever it was. And then we would then go back and fetch, once we knew that the table existed, we'd go back and fetch all of that data across and start putting it into the table that we created. And so we would add and delete columns and that type of thing by using the metadata that was coming across to create classes and all kinds of code to do really cool things. The nice thing about the metaprogramming in that case is it was very flexible, so you could pull all kinds of different types of data into one place, and it was a very small amount of code. Like the entire code base to do all that, I think it was like 700 lines of code in the end. But it's also very difficult to understand what's actually happening with it. Like you have to be incredibly intimate to be able to make the changes to it. So that was way off topic, but interesting.
Good.
All right. Any questions right now about this Rails stuff and how you can start using it, continue using it? Tomorrow we're going to get into controllers. So I would suggest that you look at that in the Rails tutorials and how they work. In many cases, I think in the general Rails tutorial, what they're going to go over is how you send a whole view of HTML down so that it can be displayed. We're not going to interact with it that way. We're going to interact with it as an API. So all of our requests are going to return JSON, which is just a set of data. It's basically the arrays and objects that we're used to working with in JavaScript back down, and we're then going to build our own HTML on the front end. So if you can find tutorials on using Rails as an API or JSON controllers in Rails, those are the types of things that you want to get ahead on for tomorrow. We'll do a very basic example of what that looks like for each of the 4 different RESTful types of calls that you can make. And then I'm going to give you a shortcut so you guys can just use the thing that we've created that should just make your lives a lot easier. You don't have to do that every time. But understanding what's happening behind the scenes is important. That's the other thing I would look up is REST. What is it? Where does it come from? Why do we use it? We'll talk more about that tomorrow too. Cool?
Yeah. Thank you.
Everybody's in a good state right now. Is anybody broken? So let's just do stand up. Get out of here.
I'm broken.
You're broken.
Yeah,
Oh,
I,
buddy, what'd you break?
I could use some help.
Oh no. Like in your life?
No, with Ruby.
Oh, with a Ruby.
You don't turn down life help, you know.
Yeah, I can always use some good advice.
Oh yeah. All right,
Maybe I
buddy.
can have Daniel or Evan help me.
There you go. Yeah. You want to
Hey, I'll see you guys tomorrow.
See you, Tony.
No real